The Alaskan wilderness, with its snow-covered peaks and icy expanses, is a realm where nature's beauty and peril coexist. These remote mountains, though breathtaking, are also unforgiving, testing the resilience of those who dare to venture into their depths. Eric, a 29-year-old Alaskan native, was no stranger to this terrain. With years of experience hiking and skiing, he found solace in the mountains, a connection forged through cherished memories with his late father. This journey, however, was different. What began as a trip to reconnect with his father's memory turned into a life-altering encounter with danger, compassion, and the unexpected bond between man and beast. An avalanche buried a pack of wolves, including their cubs, under a deadly mass of snow. Eric, caught between fear and guilt, had to decide whether to risk his life to save the helpless animals or leave them to their grim fate. What unfolded next is an inspiring tale of courage, kindness, and the lesson that appearances can be deceiving. Eric's passion for hiking and skiing. Eric's love for hiking and skiing was deeply rooted in his childhood. Growing up in Alaska, the rugged beauty of the mountains was his playground. His father, an experienced outdoorsman, introduced him to the wonders of the wilderness at an early age. Together they braved the icy trails, skied down snow-covered slopes, and spent countless evenings in the warmth of their family cabin, sharing stories by the crackling fire. For Eric, these adventures were more than just physical activities. They were a bond with his father, a way to learn life lessons and build resilience. His father's passion for the outdoors was infectious, and Eric eagerly soaked in every bit of knowledge. Whether it was learning how to navigate tricky trails, understanding weather patterns, or recognizing animal tracks, Eric absorbed it all. Over the years, he honed his skills, transforming from a curious child into a confident and skilled adventurer. However, tragedy struck when Eric was 22. His father, who had been his guide, mentor, and closest companion, passed away after a long battle with cancer. The loss was devastating, leaving a void that seemed impossible to fill. For years, Eric struggled to adjust to life without his father. The mountains, once a source of joy, now carried a bittersweet resonance. Yet they also became a sanctuary, a place where he felt his father's presence the most. Eric's visits to the family cabin became more frequent after his father's passing. He would spend days hiking, skiing, and reminiscing about the adventures they had shared. The mountains became a living memory of his father, and every trip brought him closer to the man who had shaped his love for the wilderness. As Eric grew older, his passion for hiking and skiing only deepened. He became a professional adventurer, mastering the art of navigating dangerous terrains. His instincts were razor-sharp, allowing him to sense danger before it struck. Friends and fellow adventurers often marveled at his ability to predict avalanches, spot subtle changes in weather, or avoid risky trails. These skills made him a trusted guide and a respected figure in the local hiking community. However, Eric's adventures weren't just about skill and experience. For him, they were a way to keep his father's legacy alive. Every step he took on the icy trails, every slope he skied down, was a tribute to the man who had given him the gift of the wilderness. The mountains, with their towering peaks and silent valleys, were a reminder that his father's spirit was always watching over him. Little did Eric know that one such trip would test not only his skills, but also his courage and compassion. As he packed his gear for yet another journey to the cabin, he had no idea that this adventure would lead to an encounter that would change his life forever. The warning on wolves and avalanches. As Eric prepared for his latest adventure to the Alaskan wilderness, he was reminded of the inherent dangers the mountains posed. A staple of his trips was spending the night at the family cabin, a place that offered both comfort and a gateway to the thrilling trails he loved to explore. On this trip, however, the sense of danger was heightened by a chilling news report he saw while resting in the cabin. That morning, as Eric sipped his coffee and laced his boots, the local news channel displayed a warning for hikers and skiers in the region. The report detailed an alarming incident that had occurred just days earlier. A hiker had been attacked by wolves near one of the popular trails Eric often frequented. The wolves were last spotted hunting near the mountain's base, and authorities urged adventurers to remain vigilant. Eric couldn't ignore the news. The thought of encountering a wolf pack stirred a sense of unease, even in someone as experienced as him. Wolves are often misunderstood. While they generally avoid human contact, the wilderness can make their behavior unpredictable, especially when they feel threatened or are hungry. Eric was aware of this, and he understood that fear often escalates encounters between humans and wildlife. Still, knowing that wolves had recently attacked someone put him on edge. Despite this, his longing for adventure and the pull of the mountains outweighed his apprehensions. The news segment also included another critical warning. The region was prone to avalanches at this time of year. Unstable snow layers, fluctuating temperatures, and recent weather conditions had made the area particularly risky for hikers and skiers. The authorities cautioned travelers to avoid certain trails, as even a small disturbance could trigger a massive avalanche. Eric, who had faced avalanches before, noted the warning but felt confident in his ability to navigate the terrain safely. As Eric set out on his hike, these warnings lingered in his mind. His instincts urged him to stay alert, and he frequently scanned the environment for any signs of danger. The thought of encountering wolves, combined with the risk of avalanches, created a tension that accompanied him every step of the way. It wasn't long before Eric's unease was validated. As he traversed the snow-covered trails, he spotted movement in the distance. A wolf pack, their gray and white fur blending seamlessly with the snow, appeared on the horizon. The sight stopped Eric in his tracks. The wolves were far enough away not to pose an immediate threat, but the very sight of them sent a chill down his spine. He recalled the news report and the hiker who had been attacked, his heart racing as he calculated his next move. Despite his anxiety, Eric reminded himself of what he knew about wolves. They didn't seem aggressive, and they kept their distance, moving through the snow with a natural grace. To calm his nerves, he mentally replayed the advice he had received over the years about wildlife encounters. Remain calm, avoid sudden movements, and never provoke the animals. Eric's nerves were tested again when he bumped into another hiker along the trail. This hiker had also spotted the wolves and reassured Eric that they didn't seem aggressive. The man's words were a small comfort, but he also offered a crucial piece of advice. Avalanches were frequent in the area Eric was heading toward, and he should exercise extreme caution. Though Eric promised to be careful, his focus was split between the wolves and the looming risk of avalanches. The warnings from both the news and the fellow hiker weighed heavily on his mind, but his determination to reach the summit drove him forward. Little did he know, the dangers he had been warned about would soon collide in a way that would test his courage and humanity like never before. A close encounter with wolves. As Eric continued his hike up the Alaskan mountain, the snow crunched beneath his boots, and the cold wind bit at his face. Despite the serenity of the wilderness, a sense of unease lingered in the back of his mind. The warning about wolves was still fresh, and the memory of seeing the pack earlier had heightened his vigilance. Every rustle of the wind or distant sound caused him to glance around, half expecting to see glowing eyes peering out from behind the snow-covered trees. The vast expanse of snow made it difficult to gauge distances, but Eric knew he wasn't alone. The wolf pack he had spotted earlier had moved through the area, and their tracks were faintly visible in the powdery snow. Though he had years of experience navigating the wilderness, the idea of encountering wolves unnerved him. Wolves, often misunderstood creatures, were not inherently aggressive, but their intelligence and pack dynamics made them unpredictable, especially when protecting their territory or young. Eric's apprehension grew as the trail brought him closer to where the wolves had been sighted. He scanned the horizon, his sharp instincts attuned to any signs of movement. Suddenly in the distance, he caught a glimpse of gray fur darting through the trees. His breath caught and his heart began to race. There they were, a pack of 6 wolves, including 2 smaller cubs, their coats blending perfectly with the snowy backdrop. For a moment, Eric stood frozen. The wolves weren't moving toward him, but their presence was enough to make his pulse quicken. The alpha wolf, larger and more imposing than the others, stood at the forefront, its piercing eyes scanning the surroundings. Eric's years of experience told him not to panic. Running or making sudden movements could trigger an aggressive response, so he remained as calm and still as possible, silently observing the pack. The wolves, seemingly uninterested in Eric, moved gracefully through the snow, their focus elsewhere. Eric couldn't help but admire their beauty and coordination. The way they communicated with subtle glances and body language was a testament to their intelligence and tight-knit social structure. Yet the fear remained. He knew that a sudden change in circumstances, a loud noise, a perceived threat, could shift their behavior in an instant. As he resumed his hike, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The wolves, though distant, seemed to linger at the edges of his vision. At times he thought he saw movement out of the corner of his eye, only to find nothing when he turned to look. It was as though the pack was silently observing him, assessing whether he posed a threat. Eric's unease wasn't unfounded. The news report had painted a picture of danger, and the other hikers' warning about wolf attacks was fresh in his mind. Yet, as he continued to observe the wolves from a distance, Eric noticed something unexpected. The pack didn't display any signs of aggression. They didn't snarl, growl, or move toward him. Instead, they kept to themselves, maintaining a respectful distance as they moved through the snowy terrain. Reassured by their non-threatening behavior, Eric began to relax, at least slightly. He reminded himself that wolves are generally not a danger to humans, unless provoked or desperate for food. Still, the encounter served as a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of the wilderness. Even the most experienced hikers and skiers like Eric were at the mercy of the natural world and its inhabitants. As the day went on, the wolf pack gradually disappeared from Eric's sight, blending seamlessly into the snowy landscape. But their presence had left a lasting impression. Eric had always respected the power and beauty of nature, but this encounter deepened his understanding of the delicate balance between fear and admiration. The wilderness was a place of wonder and danger, and the wolves embodied both in equal measure. What Eric didn't realize was that his connection to the wolves was far from over. The pack he had observed so intently would soon play a central role in an event that would challenge his courage and compassion like never before. The avalanche strikes. Eric's journey toward the summit was both thrilling and peaceful, filled with moments of awe as he took in the snow-covered peaks around him. The air was crisp, the sun gleamed off the icy slopes, and the wilderness seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. However, the warnings he had heard earlier about avalanches continued to echo in his mind. Despite his experience and instincts, Eric couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that danger was closer than it appeared. After hours of hiking, Eric finally reached the summit. The view was breathtaking, with rolling white hills and jagged mountaintops stretching as far as the eye could see. He set down his gear and prepared to ski down the slope, excited to feel the rush of adrenaline that came with every descent. However, as he began to position himself, something caught his attention. A subtle but ominous crack in the snow beneath his feet. Eric's instincts kicked in immediately. He crouched low and assessed the situation. Small chunks of snow began to shift and slide down the slope, a clear warning sign that the snowpack was unstable. The temperature, which had been cold and steady earlier, felt noticeably warmer now, adding to his growing concern. Within moments, the crack spread, and the ground beneath him seemed to tremble as the snow began to collapse. Realizing the imminent danger, Eric sprang into action. He quickly moved to a safer zone, using his years of experience to navigate away from the unstable area. As he reached solid ground, he turned back just in time to witness the full force of nature's fury. A massive avalanche cascading down the mountain with a deafening roar. The sheer scale of the event was overwhelming, as tons of snow barreled down the slope, tearing through everything in its path. Eric barely had time to process what he had just escaped when his eyes caught something horrifying. In the distance, right in the path of the avalanche, was the wolf pack he had seen earlier. The animals, caught off guard by the sudden disaster, scrambled to escape. The larger wolves attempted to shield the cubs, but the avalanche was too fast and powerful. In mere seconds, the entire pack disappeared under the massive wave of snow. Eric's heart sank as he watched helplessly from a distance. The sight of the wolves struggling against the avalanche was haunting. and the realization of what had just happened left him speechless. His mind raced with thoughts of guilt and responsibility. He couldn't help but wonder if his decision to hike to the summit had somehow triggered the avalanche. Though he knew logically that such events are often unpredictable, the weight of the situation bore down on him. From his vantage point, Eric could see the aftermath of the avalanche, a vast, chaotic field of snow and debris where the wolf pack had once been. The silence that followed was almost deafening, broken only by the sound of his own heavy breathing. The wolves, including the cubs, were buried somewhere beneath the snow, their fate uncertain. I can't just leave them, Eric thought to himself, though fear clawed at his resolve. The warnings about the wolves being dangerous resurfaced in his mind, and the idea of digging them out felt both daunting and risky. What if they attacked him in panic or desperation? What if he couldn't reach them in time? These questions swirled in his mind, but a stronger feeling, compassion, began to take hold. The thought of the cubs freezing or suffocating under the snow was unbearable. Despite the risk to his own safety, Eric knew he couldn't turn his back on the helpless creatures. His years of experience had taught him to respect all life in the wilderness, and in this moment, that respect demanded action. Eric tightened his gloves, adjusted his gear, and made his way toward the avalanche site. His heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination as he prepared for what would be one of the most challenging and profound moments of his life. Eric's guilt and dilemma. As Eric stood at the edge of the avalanche site, staring at the vast expanse of snow and debris, a heavy sense of guilt washed over him. The scene before him was overwhelming. The once majestic wolf pack, which had moved so gracefully through the snow, was now buried under a thick, suffocating layer of ice and snow. Eric's chest tightened at the thought that they might not survive. In his heart, Eric believed he might be partially responsible for the disaster. The warnings about avalanches, the hiker's advice to avoid certain areas, and his own instincts, all of it seemed like a clear signal that he should have turned back. Yet his determination to reach the summit had driven him forward. Now, standing amidst the aftermath, he couldn't help but wonder if his decision to hike that specific route had disturbed the delicate balance of the snowpack, triggering the catastrophic event. The thought of walking away crossed Eric's mind. After all, the wolves were wild animals, and their survival wasn't his responsibility. No one would blame him if he chose to prioritize his safety and leave the area. Yet, each time he considered this, the image of the cubs flashed in his mind. Innocent, vulnerable creatures buried beneath the snow. The idea of leaving them to such a cruel fate was unbearable. Eric's internal conflict grew more intense as fear began to take hold. Wolves are known for their loyalty and protective instincts. If he managed to dig them out, there was a real possibility they would see him as a threat, an attack. The memory of the news report about the wolves attacking a hiker just days earlier resurfaced, amplifying his anxiety. What if they don't understand I'm trying to help? Eric thought, his hands trembling slightly. He knew that rescuing the wolves was not without risk, but his conscience wouldn't let him walk away. The wilderness had taught him many lessons over the years, and one of the most important was that every life, human or animal, deserved a chance. As Eric wrestled with his thoughts, he tried to rationalize his fears. Wolves, though powerful and intimidating, are not inherently aggressive toward humans unless provoked. The pack's earlier behavior, keeping their distance and showing no signs of hostility, gave him a glimmer of hope. Perhaps he thought they would recognize his efforts to save them and respond with trust rather than aggression. Driven by a mix of guilt, compassion, and a deep respect for nature, Eric made his decision. "It's my fault anyway," he muttered to himself, tightening his grip on his gear. "The least I can do is try to help them." With that resolve, Eric approached the avalanche site cautiously. The snow was packed tightly, making it difficult to dig, but he worked tirelessly, using his hands and tools to clear the heavy layers. Each shovelful of snow brought him closer to the wolves, though the process was slow and physically exhausting. As he dug, Eric couldn't shake the thought of the cubs. He imagined them buried in the freezing cold, struggling to breathe. The image spurred him on, pushing him to ignore the burning in his arms and the biting chill of the wind. He whispered words of encouragement to himself, a habit he had developed during his solo hikes to keep his spirits up. Just a little more, he said, his breath visible in the icy air. After what felt like an eternity, Eric finally uncovered the first wolf, a large adult that appeared lifeless, its body still and covered in frost. His heart sank, but he refused to give up. Gently, he moved the wolf aside and continued digging. One by one, he uncovered the others, 2 more adult wolves, and finally the 2 cubs. The sight of the cubs brought a wave of emotion. They were smaller than he had imagined, their fragile bodies almost disappearing into the snow. Carefully, he pulled them out and placed them beside the others, wrapping them in his jacket to keep them warm. Though the wolves were free from the snow, Eric's dilemma was far from over. The animals remained motionless, their fate uncertain. He began to wonder if his efforts had come too late. "Please wake up," he whispered, his voice trembling. His heart ached at the thought of losing them after coming so far. As he sat there, surrounded by the still bodies of the wolves, Eric felt a deep connection to them. Despite his fear and the risks involved, he had chosen compassion over self-preservation. Now, all he could do was hope that his efforts hadn't been in vain. Little did Eric know the next moments would bring an extraordinary turn of events, one that would forever change how he viewed the wilderness and the creatures that called it home. The daring rescue mission. Eric's heart pounded as he knelt beside the wolves, their still bodies partially covered in frost. The stark reality of the situation hit him. He had risked everything to save them, yet they lay motionless, their fate hanging by a thread. He wasn't ready to give up, though. Eric's determination to see the wolves survive pushed him to act quickly. The rescue had been physically and emotionally grueling. Eric had spent over 10 minutes digging through the densely packed snow, each shovelful feeling heavier than the last. The avalanche had buried the wolves deeply, and the freezing temperatures made the snow even more compact. As he worked, he fought against the biting wind, his fingers stiff and numb despite his gloves. His body screamed in protest, but he refused to stop, driven by a sense of urgency and responsibility. When Eric finally uncovered all 5 wolves, 3 adults and 2 cubs, he quickly assessed their condition. They were cold, their fur matted with frost, and their bodies lay limp. At first glance, it seemed as though the avalanche had claimed their lives. Eric felt a pang of despair, but he clung to hope. He had seen enough of the wilderness to know that even the smallest signs of life could lead to survival. Eric's instincts told him that he needed to act fast to warm the wolves. He gently brushed off the snow from their fur, careful not to cause further harm. Using his jacket and gear, he created a makeshift barrier to shield them from the wind. The 2 cubs, smaller and more vulnerable, were his priority. He wrapped them in his spare jacket, holding them close to share his body heat. As he tended to the wolves, Eric's mind raced with thoughts of how to revive them. He remembered lessons from his hiking and wilderness training, how to warm a hypothermic body and stimulate circulation. Though these techniques were meant for humans, he hoped they might work for the wolves too. He massaged their fur gently, trying to restore some warmth and encourage blood flow. Time felt like it was slipping away, and Eric's anxiety grew with each passing second. The stillness of the wolves was unnerving. He whispered words of encouragement, a habit he had developed over years of solo hiking. "Come on, you can make it," he said softly, as if his voice could will them back to life. Just when Eric began to doubt his efforts, a miraculous sign of life appeared. The largest wolf, an imposing adult that Eric guessed to be the alpha, stirred slightly. Its chest rose and fell in a shallow breath, and then it let out a loud, raspy sneeze. The sound startled Eric, but it also filled him with relief. The wolf was alive. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. The alpha wolf slowly opened its eyes and looked around, as if assessing the situation. It struggled to its feet, shaking off the frost from its fur. Eric watched in awe as the wolf turned its attention to the others. With a sense of urgency, the alpha began sniffing and nudging the other wolves, almost as if it understood what needed to be done. One by one, the wolves began to show signs of life. The alpha's gentle prodding seemed to awaken them, and soon, the other 2 adults and the cubs began to stir. Eric could hardly believe what he was seeing. The wolves, who moments ago appeared lifeless, were now regaining their strength. Eric maintained his distance as the wolves slowly recovered. He didn't want to startle them or provoke an aggressive response. Yet, as he observed their behavior, he noticed something remarkable. The wolves showed no signs of fear or hostility toward him. Instead, they seemed to acknowledge his presence with a quiet calmness. The cubs, still wrapped in Eric's jacket, were the last to regain consciousness. The alpha wolf approached them cautiously, sniffing and licking their small bodies to encourage movement. Eric felt a deep sense of relief as the cubs let out soft whimpers, a sure sign that they were alive. Though the rescue had been successful, Eric knew the danger wasn't over. He was now face to face with a pack of wolves in the middle of the wilderness. The question lingered in his mind: would they see him as a savior or a threat? Eric's heart raced as the alpha wolf turned its gaze toward him and began to approach. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he stood his ground, knowing that fleeing could provoke an attack. As the wolf drew closer, Eric prepared himself for the worst. But what happened next would leave him forever changed. The daring rescue mission. Eric's heart pounded as he knelt beside the wolves, their still bodies partially covered in frost. The stark reality of the situation hit him. He had risked everything to save them, yet they lay motionless, their fate hanging by a thread. He wasn't ready to give up, though. Eric's determination to see the wolves survive pushed him to act quickly. The rescue had been physically and emotionally grueling. Eric had spent over 10 minutes digging through the densely packed snow, each shovelful feeling heavier than the last. The avalanche had buried the wolves deeply, and the freezing temperatures made the snow even more compact. As he worked, he fought against the biting wind, his fingers stiff and numb despite his gloves. His body screamed in protest, but he refused to stop, driven by a sense of urgency and responsibility. When Eric finally uncovered all 5 wolves, 3 adults and 2 cubs, he quickly assessed their condition. They were cold, their fur matted with frost, and their bodies lay limp. At first glance, it seemed as though the avalanche had claimed their lives. Eric felt a pang of despair, but he clung to hope. He had seen enough of the wilderness to know that even the smallest signs of life could lead to survival. Eric's instincts told him that he needed to act fast to warm the wolves. He gently brushed off the snow from their fur, careful not to cause further harm. Using his jacket and gear, he created a makeshift barrier to shield them from the wind. The 2 cubs, smaller and more vulnerable, were his priority. He wrapped them in his spare jacket, holding them close to share his body heat. As he tended to the wolves, Eric's mind raced with thoughts of how to revive them. He remembered lessons from his hiking and wilderness training, how to warm a hypothermic body and stimulate circulation. Though these techniques were meant for humans, he hoped they might work for the wolves too. He massaged their fur gently, trying to restore some warmth and encourage blood flow. Time felt like it was slipping away, and Eric's anxiety grew with each passing second. The stillness of the wolves was unnerving. He whispered words of encouragement, a habit he had developed over years of solo hiking. "Come on, you can make it," he said softly, as if his voice could will them back to life. Just when Eric began to doubt his efforts, a miraculous sign of life appeared. The largest wolf, an imposing adult that Eric guessed to be the alpha, stirred slightly. Its chest rose and fell in a shallow breath, and then it let out a loud, raspy sneeze. The sound startled Eric, but it also filled him with relief. The wolf was alive. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. The alpha wolf slowly opened its eyes and looked around, as if assessing the situation. It struggled to its feet, shaking off the frost from its fur. Eric watched in awe as the wolf turned its attention to the others. With a sense of urgency, the alpha began sniffing and nudging the other wolves, almost as if it understood what needed to be done. One by one, the wolves began to show signs of life. The alpha's gentle prodding seemed to awaken them, and soon, the other 2 adults and the cubs began to stir. Eric could hardly believe what he was seeing. The wolves, who moments ago appeared lifeless, were now regaining their strength. Eric maintained his distance as the wolves slowly recovered. He didn't want to startle them or provoke an aggressive response. Yet, as he observed their behavior, he noticed something remarkable. The wolves showed no signs of fear or hostility toward him. Instead, they seemed to acknowledge his presence with a quiet calmness. The cubs, still wrapped in Eric's jacket, were the last to regain consciousness. The alpha wolf approached them cautiously, sniffing and licking their small bodies to encourage movement. Eric felt a deep sense of relief as the cubs let out soft whimpers, a sure sign that they were alive. Though the rescue had been successful, Eric knew the danger wasn't over. He was now face to face with a pack of wolves in the middle of the wilderness. The question lingered in his mind: would they see him as a savior or a threat? Eric's heart raced as the alpha wolf turned its gaze toward him and began to approach. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he stood his ground, knowing that fleeing could provoke an attack. As the wolf drew closer, Eric prepared himself for the worst. But what happened next would leave him forever changed. A miraculous recovery. The stillness of the snowy wilderness was broken by the miraculous sight of life returning to the wolves. Eric stood a few feet away, breathless and awestruck, as the alpha wolf, now fully awake, nudged and licked the other members of the pack. Each gentle nudge seemed to coax them back to consciousness, and one by one the wolves began to stir. The alpha, a majestic Arctic wolf with a coat of pure white and piercing eyes, appeared to take charge immediately. Its movements were deliberate and purposeful, as though it instinctively knew what to do to revive its pack. Eric watched in amazement as the alpha attended to the cubs first, gently licking their small faces to warm them and stimulate their breathing. The sight of the cubs' tiny bodies twitching and letting out soft whimpers filled Eric with an overwhelming sense of relief. The other two adult wolves were slower to recover, their movements sluggish as they shook off the snow and frost clinging to their fur. Despite their weakened state, they responded to the alpha's efforts, rising shakily to their feet. The pack's resilience was a testament to their strength and bond, and Eric couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for these creatures. Eric had seen many wonders in the wilderness during his years of hiking and skiing, but this moment felt different. It wasn't just a display of nature's tenacity, it was a profound reminder of the interconnectedness of life. Watching the alpha wolf care for its pack, Eric felt a deep respect for the loyalty and instinctive compassion that these animals showed toward one another. For a moment, Eric allowed himself to believe that his work was done. The wolves were alive and their recovery was nothing short of miraculous. However, his sense of relief was quickly replaced by a new wave of anxiety. The wolves were now fully conscious, and their attention had shifted to him. The alpha wolf, having ensured the well-being of its pack, turned its piercing gaze toward Eric. It took a few cautious steps in his direction, its body language calm but deliberate. Eric's heart pounded in his chest as he stood frozen, unsure of what the wolf's intentions were. He had heard countless stories of wolves attacking humans, and the warnings from the news report flashed in his mind. But there was something different about this encounter. The alpha's eyes didn't convey aggression or hostility. Instead, they seemed to hold a sense of curiosity and even acknowledgement. Eric's instincts, honed by years in the wilderness, told him to remain still and avoid any sudden movements. He let out a slow, steady breath, trying to calm his racing heart. As the alpha wolf approached, the other members of the pack watched closely, their bodies tense but not threatening. The cubs huddled close to the adults, their small eyes peeking out from behind their protectors. Eric felt as though he were standing before a council of the wild, awaiting their judgment. To Eric's astonishment, the alpha wolf stopped just a few feet away from him. It tilted its head slightly as if studying him, and then did something Eric never expected. The wolf took another step closer and gently licked his face. The sensation was cold and wet, but it sent a wave of warmth through Eric's entire being. The gesture was unmistakable. It was a sign of gratitude, a silent acknowledgement of the kindness Eric had shown in saving the pack. The alpha's actions were followed by a brief moment of stillness, as if it were waiting to see how Eric would react. Summoning his courage, Eric slowly extended his hand toward the wolf. The alpha sniffed his hand cautiously before giving it a gentle lick. It was a moment of mutual understanding, a bridge between two beings from entirely different worlds. The other wolves, seeing the alpha's acceptance of Eric, seemed to relax as well. The tension in the air dissipated, replaced by an unspoken truce. Eric couldn't believe what was happening. The wolves, creatures he had once feared and avoided, were now showing him a level of trust and gratitude that left him speechless. In that moment, Eric realized that his decision to save them had not only given the wolves a second chance, but had also given him a new perspective on the wilderness and its inhabitants. This miraculous recovery and the unexpected bond that followed would stay with Eric forever, a testament to the power of compassion and the surprising ways nature can respond to kindness. An unforgettable encounter with the alpha wolf. Eric stood frozen in place as the alpha wolf gazed at him with its piercing, intelligent eyes. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension, yet there was no aggression in the wolf's posture. It moved with a calm and deliberate grace, each step calculated and measured as it approached him. Eric's heart pounded in his chest. His mind raced through all the possibilities of what might happen next. The alpha was enormous, its arctic white fur shimmering against the snowy backdrop. It towered over the cubs and stood slightly larger than the other adults in the pack. Everything about it exuded power and authority. Eric had heard stories of alpha wolves leading their packs with discipline and strength, but seeing one up close was a profoundly humbling experience. As the alpha closed the gap between them, Eric instinctively prepared for the worst. He had read enough about wolves to know that they were unpredictable, especially when their young were involved. Every fiber of his being told him to run, but he knew better. Running would trigger the wolf's predatory instincts, and Eric would stand no chance of outrunning such a powerful animal. Instead, Eric stayed rooted to the spot, his breath visible in the frigid air as he exhaled slowly, trying to keep his composure. He lowered his gaze slightly, a subtle gesture to avoid appearing confrontational. The rest of the pack watched from a distance, their bodies tense but unmoving, as if awaiting a signal from their leader. The alpha stopped just a few feet away, its sharp eyes locked onto Eric. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional gust of wind that swirled snow around them. Eric felt his pulse quicken as the wolf took another step closer. Then, to his utter disbelief, the alpha tilted its head slightly and leaned in toward him. A cold, wet sensation brushed against Eric's face. For a moment, he was too stunned to react. The alpha wolf was licking him, a gesture that felt as surreal as it was unexpected. It wasn't the aggressive attack he had feared, nor was it a warning. Instead, it was a sign of trust, a moment of connection that transcended the boundaries between human and animal. Eric could hardly believe what was happening. The wolf's tongue, cool and gentle, was a stark contrast to its powerful appearance. The gesture carried an unspoken message, a thank you for saving its pack. The alpha took a step back, giving Eric space, but its eyes remained fixed on him, as if waiting to see how he would respond. Gathering his courage, Eric slowly extended his right hand toward the wolf. His movements were deliberate, avoiding any sudden or threatening gestures. The alpha watched him intently, its ears twitching slightly. After a moment's hesitation, it leaned forward and sniffed his hand. Eric held his breath as the wolf gave his hand a light lick, further solidifying the bond between them. The other wolves began to relax, their tense postures softening as they observed the interaction. It was as if the alpha's acceptance of Eric had put them at ease, signaling that he was not a threat. Even the cubs, still huddled close to their mothers, peeked out curiously at the human who had saved their lives. Eric felt an overwhelming mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and awe. In that moment, he realized that the wolves were far more than the aggressive creatures he had feared. They were intelligent, perceptive, and capable of forming connections in ways he had never imagined. The alpha's actions had not only spared him from harm, but also taught him a profound lesson about trust and compassion. After a few moments, the alpha took another step back, its gaze softening. It turned to face the rest of the pack, letting out a low, rumbling sound that seemed to carry a sense of calm authority. The other wolves responded immediately, gathering themselves and preparing to move on. Before leaving, the alpha glanced back at Eric one last time. The look in its eyes was unforgettable, a mix of acknowledgement and respect. Then, with a powerful leap, it led the pack away, disappearing into the snowy wilderness. Eric watched in silence as the wolves vanished from sight. His heart swelled with a sense of gratitude and wonder. He had come face to face with one of nature's most formidable predators and emerged not as prey but as an ally. The encounter was more than just a brush with danger. It was a life-changing moment that deepened his respect for the natural world and the creatures that inhabit it. This extraordinary connection with the alpha wolf would remain etched in Eric's memory forever, a reminder of the beauty and complexity of the wilderness and the unexpected bonds that can form when kindness and courage come together. A story passed through generations. For Eric, the extraordinary encounter with the wolf pack was far more than a fleeting moment in the wilderness. It became a story that defined his connection with nature and shaped his perspective on life. It was a tale of bravery, compassion, and the surprising bond between man and beast, one that he would carry with him for the rest of his days. After returning from the mountains, Eric shared his experience with his closest friends and family. They were captivated by his vivid descriptions of the wolves and the harrowing rescue. The image of the alpha wolf licking Eric's face as a gesture of gratitude left everyone in awe. It was a story that seemed almost too incredible to be true, yet Eric's sincerity and passion made it impossible to doubt. Over the years, Eric continued to tell the story, refining it with every retelling. To his children and later his grandchildren, it became a bedtime favorite, a story of courage and connection that sparked their imaginations. Sitting by the fireplace in his family cabin, Eric would recount the adventure in detail: the cold bite of the wind, the thunderous roar of the avalanche, and the moment he stood face to face with the alpha wolf. As his children listened with wide eyes, Eric emphasized the lessons he had learned. Nature, he would say, is not something to be conquered or feared. It's something to be respected and protected. Even the creatures we misunderstand the most can surprise us with their intelligence and kindness. These words left a lasting impression on his family, inspiring them to see the wilderness not as a place of danger, but as a world full of wonder and discovery. Eric's grandchildren were particularly enthralled by the story. They peppered him with questions about the wolves. "Were you scared, Grandpa? What did the cubs look like? Did you ever see them again?" Eric answered each question with patience and enthusiasm, delighted by their curiosity. He hoped that his story would inspire them to appreciate the natural world and develop the same love for hiking and exploration that he had inherited from his father. As Eric grew older, the story of the wolves became more than just a personal memory. It became a family legacy. His children and grandchildren began to share it with their own friends and communities, spreading its message far and wide. The tale resonated with people of all ages, offering a powerful reminder of the importance of compassion and the unexpected beauty of connection. Eric also found ways to share his experience beyond his family. He became a guest speaker at local schools and outdoor clubs, using his story to educate others about wildlife conservation and the need for coexistence. He stressed the value of empathy, explaining how his decision to save the wolves had not only given them a second chance, but also enriched his own life in ways he could never have imagined. One of Eric's favorite moments came when a local wildlife organization invited him to speak at a conservation event. Standing before an audience of nature enthusiasts, he recounted his journey with the wolves, emphasizing the role humans play in protecting the natural world. His words struck a chord, inspiring many in the audience to become advocates for wildlife and the environment. As time passed, Eric's story took on a life of its own. It became a source of inspiration for hikers, adventurers, and animal lovers alike. People who heard it were reminded of the power of kindness and the profound impact a single act of courage could have. Even in his later years, when Eric's hiking days were behind him, the memory of the wolves remained as vivid as ever. He could still picture the alpha wolf's piercing gaze, the feel of its cold tongue against his face, and the sight of the cubs taking their first steps after being rescued. These memories were a source of joy and comfort, a testament to the enduring bond between man and nature. Eric often reflected on how the encounter had changed him. Before that day, he had seen himself as a visitor in the wilderness, a solitary explorer seeking peace and adventure. But after meeting the wolves, he realized that he was part of something much larger, a delicate, interconnected web of life that required care and respect to thrive. The story of Eric and the wolves became a family treasure, passed down through generations as a reminder of the values he held dear. It was a story not just of survival, but of empathy, understanding, and the transformative power of an open heart. As Eric's grandchildren grew up, many of them followed in his footsteps, exploring the wilderness with the same sense of wonder and respect he had instilled in them. And though the wolves were never seen again, their legacy lived on, carried forward by the man who had risked everything to save them and the countless lives he touched with his story.